Hello, everybody, and thank you for joining us on this very special webinar, Avoiding Elder Care Catastrophes. These are estate planning issues that will impact you and your future. My name is Fiona, and I will be your host for today's workshop, which is being brought to you from Robert Slutsky Associates, an elder law firm with offices in Montgomery, Chester, and Delaware counties. So just to give you a little introduction of Rob, Rob has been practicing elder law in Pennsylvania since 1992, and he was one of the area's very first elder law attorneys. Rob advises his clients on Medicaid and asset protection planning, guardianships, wills, trusts, powers of attorney. He also helps with estate administration, special needs planning, and general estate planning. And he has represented both for-profit and not-for-profit elder care providers, and really importantly, the Pennsylvania Department of Aging. Rob was their solicitor for the Montgomery County Office of Aging and Adult Services and the Area Agency of Aging for Montgomery County for over 17 years. So he was really one of the very, very first people to do this in this area. Now, his practice covers the entire Philadelphia 5-county area, and most recently, he has been named one of the Mainline's top elder care lawyers by Mainline Today. And you can learn more about Rob by visiting his website at slutskyelderlaw.com. And if you go there, you want to make sure that you go to that resources section where you will find this webinar and other webinars to help give you a little bit of information about what you need to think about when you are planning your long-term care and planning for those needs. So on that note, I'm going to give you a little overview of what we're doing today and then turn it over to Rob, who will really give you the meat of the training. So today we're going to look at what estate planning is. And those issues around estate planning, special things to consider, special situations. So Rob, I'm going to turn over to you, and I'm going to start with a question, which of course is, can you tell us a little bit about what estate planning is?
Thanks, Fiona. Well, estate planning is kind of a process, and obviously it's very different for everybody. It's very fact-specific. But when you're talking about estate planning, I think you start with accumulating your assets. It's about saving, it's about investing, it's about those types of things. And that's not really what I do as an elder law attorney, but that's part of the plan. People can't have an estate to plan and to deal with when they're older if they haven't accumulated assets and invested. So that's where we start with the first part. And then the second part is kind of the part of your life where you start to spend down your resources, where you are taking income, where you are depleting some of the resources, and hopefully, you planned well enough at the front end that you won't deplete them all before you pass away, unless that's one of your goals. And what part of that depletion process and that kind of retirement, living off of what you've earned and saved, is to consider the long-term care needs. So what do you consider when you're planning your estate? Well, I think first and foremost is, what do you want to accomplish? For some people, they have a young family, and when we talk about avoiding elder care catastrophes, we're really talking about becoming older and hopefully having lived a long, good life. But part of my practice is helping younger people plan ahead, people who are not elderly. So first thing we want to consider is, when we're younger, who are we planning for? I always make a comment when I speak to consumers, is that selfish people don't plan. You're really planning for other people. So when you're planning, when you're younger, you're typically planning for your spouse or your partner, your children, the people you care about, who you want to protect. As you age, you're thinking about different needs and different processes and what's going to happen after you've accumulated assets, and now maybe your kids are adults, but you want to age happily and healthy with your spouse or partner or whatever. So the things that we consider when we're younger are, how do we take care of our spouse, partner, or children if we die or get disabled? Then and what is that? Well, it could be involving some sort of insurance. It's your savings. It's dealing with the possibility that you will not be able to provide for those loved ones. As you become older, you're thinking about, how do I spend down my resources? How do I plan to have resources as I age? What are the costs that I'm going to need to deal with? Because obviously when you're younger, you're thinking about saving for retirement. You're thinking about purchasing insurance. You're thinking about paying off your debts. As you get older, you're thinking about, okay, I'm going to have less income, but I'm going to have different expenses. So let's make sure that we plan and budget for those things. As you age, obviously, healthcare becomes a much more costly part of your planning, and you have to think about that, because most of the most recent studies talk about healthcare and retirement costing, $300,000 plus. So you have to make sure that you have not only the assets to spend down, but that those assets can generate the income you need to pay for those expenses. And as you age, as you become a little bit more physically frail and in need of assistance, most people today, like it or not, are going to have to consider long-term care. And really, what is long-term care? Long-term care is when you need someone to assist you with what people call activities of daily living. Getting yourself dressed, bathing, getting out of the house, meal prep, getting to appointments. These are things that most of us at some point, because medical science has let us live longer, are going to need help with at some point. So we have to think about that. And when we think about that, we have to not just think, how do we pay for it, but we have to think how we want it delivered. Some people want it in their home, and usually that's where it starts. Other people think, no, I'd rather be in a community where there's social options and other things that I can do with other people. So, some people say they want to be at home, and yet that can be isolating, and they can determine really that a community situation is better for them. So we have to think about where it's going to be provided. And of course, probably the single biggest issue is whether you have the funds to pay for it and how you're going to pay for it. For some people, realistically, the options are going to be limited, because long-term care can be very expensive. But if you have, for instance, the family support or the community support, you have more options. So these are things you have to consider. This is a relatively brief webinar, and this is not going to give us all the answers, but this is just one of a number of webinars that we're going to do on this topic that's going to give you just a broad discussion to kind of make you start thinking, and then we can discuss in more detail some of the more specific options and considerations when someone, gets older and is in need of more care. So let's talk about what tools may be available. In basic estate planning, everybody needs a will. A will is simply a document that states where your assets are going to go when you die. Now, a will doesn't cover all of your estate planning, because some people, in fact most people today, have assets that won't be controlled by your will, like a life insurance policy that has a beneficiary on it. And therefore, the beneficiary is going to control, and your will is not going to control that asset because it's got the beneficiary. People use trusts. Now, trusts are a very, very detailed, complicated topic, but trusts are basically a way of controlling the disposition of your assets either while you're alive or after you pass away. And trusts can have many, many purposes. They could be used for, to control disposition of money because a child may not be responsible or have good money skills. It could be to help a disabled child. It can be used for asset protection and tax planning. But a trust is just one of the many tools, and there's many permutations and types of trusts, but they're one of the things that I will typically use for clients in specific situations. Probably today, for the average middle-class person, the single most important tool or document is going to be a durable power of attorney. A power of attorney is a document that allows you to name someone who can be your advocate, sort of your surrogate decision maker. And a power of attorney can have a lot of different authority that you give. It can allow someone to make financial decisions for you. It can allow someone to make medical decisions for you. It can allow someone to make end-of-life decisions for you. And they're all kind of different, but they all come together in a plan, because if you have done your job in the planning and you have put all these documents and plans into place, what you're doing is allowing continuity of planning so that you can avoid certain expensive problems that can occur. And again, these are all will be discussed in much more detail in a future webinar. Financial products. When I talk about financial products, I'm not talking about selling you something, but there are financial products that have the goal of trying to insure against certain problems, that people have as they age. For instance, everybody knows what life insurance is. There's about 1,000 different types of life insurance, and at different points in life, life insurance, it has different it serves different needs, and it serves different purposes. But when people are younger, typically they'll buy term insurance because it gives them the most bang for the buck, and they need the most insurance to take care of college expenses for their children or needs of their spouse or partner. And as they age, there are products out there that can help pay for long-term care, or if you still decide you want life insurance to, for instance, leave a financial legacy to your family. There's a lot of different financial products out there, and they serve a lot of different purposes, but they are typically part of an overall plan. Although the types of policies and the types of products that are out there change, and what you need them for change as you age and as your financial situation changes. Asset protection planning. That's a very, very broad term, but it really does cover a lot of different things. In my practice, asset protection planning is really the process where people are trying to make sure that they have assets available, whether it's to pay for their care, to be available to pay for their spouse or partner's care down the road, or to leave a legacy, a financial legacy to their loved ones or to their spouse or partner or to a charitable organization. So everybody's terms of asset protection planning are different, but for those who are very, very wealthy, asset protection planning takes on a very different flavor. For those people, it's protecting against creditors because they may be a target of a deep pocket for credit for people who want to access their funds. But for most people, for the middle class that I deal with, the middle and the upper middle class, asset protection is really about the single biggest risk to your financial net worth, which is long-term care planning. So for those people who have modest or even moderate and sometimes significant assets, they have to worry today about the cost of long-term care. I didn't get into that earlier, but it's a very expensive process, with nursing homes in the Philadelphia region running between $10,000 and $15,000 a month, and home care, if you want 24-hour home care, not very different in cost. People have to consider that and say, how do they want to protect their assets if that is a priority to them?
So, Rob, when you sit down with folks, what you're doing then with this development of a plan is talking people through all of these separate issues and helping them come to a personalized plan that works for their very specific situation. Is that correct?
That's exactly what we do. There is no one-size-fits-all plan that works for everybody.
So somebody could have more modest assets and come to you, or somebody could have be more affluent and come to you, and you would find just whatever fits their individual needs.
Right, and you'd be surprised. I mean, today, because of the cost of long-term care, what used to be for people who, what used to be termed middle class, actually now extends to people who have higher net worth. It used to be people who were worried about Medicaid and long-term care costs were people of relatively middle-class means, meaning, say, $250,000, $750,000 in net worth, including all of their resources. Today, I have people who have $2 and $3 million plus who are still concerned about long-term care costs because they want to leave a legacy to their children or to their partner, but also the fact that even if you have several million dollars at $10,000 to $15,000 a month per spouse, you're talking, that could burn through the assets pretty quickly of even a large estate.
Absolutely. So I guess that leads us into these different special situations that can really change the ball a little bit for people when they're doing their planning.
Yes. Today, I think, given that, of the overall rate of marriage and divorce, second marriages, third marriages, fourth marriages are a very relevant part of planning. Whereas, 40, 50 years ago, we had the Ozzie and Harriet standard kind of family plan, husband and wife, 2 or 3 kids, one marriage throughout the entire life. We also had people who had jobs that they kept their entire life. Things have changed. Today, the bulk of my clients have, either married and divorced once or more. So when you have that, we have to consider the different issues that come with that extended family. We have to consider how much funds have been accumulated by each spouse, whether those spouses have keep their assets separate, or whether their second or third marriage occurred relatively early in life. You know, I have clients who are second or third marriages, but they've been with the same spouse now for 30 or 40 years, where they really don't treat it like a second or third marriage, where they really didn't have much in the way of money that was accumulated prior to the second marriage or the third marriage, and therefore they're really just like, you know, an old style marriage and relationship where they treat the kids kind of like everybody's kids, and it's very simple. But we also have situations where there are adult children, and the marriage occurred after the children were adults, and therefore there's different alliances and different dynamic. And with those dynamics, we have to consider the financial end. And sometimes the planning can get more complicated as a result of this, and we have to put in more protective provisions. And we also have to have a little bit more frank discussions about what the goals are, because even though everybody seems to be on the same page, once that spouse passes away, and now we have the surviving spouse who may have different children than the spouse that has deceased, we then, issues could come up as to alliances and the dynamics that may have existed prior to death, but now are coming to the forefront. So we have to consider that there's more complication and protective documentation that we need to do. We have LGBT issues, which are not very different from conventional relationship issues today. And it has to do the same kind of with unmarried partners. You know, 15 years ago, the planning was people who are in LGBT relationships couldn't marry, and therefore their issues were vastly different, because you had to consider how the law differently or treated them from a tax perspective, from an inheritance perspective, from a decision-making perspective. Today, people who are in LGBT relationships can choose to get married. Now, the same issue, though, attaches to them as it would to unmarried partners who are in more conventional relationships but simply haven't chosen to get married. One of the things that we often discuss is, when someone is in that type of relationship, is it the right thing to get married? In other words, marriage has benefits, but also marriage has some downsides from a financial perspective. So we look at, are the partners coming from vastly different financial circumstances? Is one partner much more financially secure than the other? Are there good reasons to stay unmarried, even though there may be, you know, love and affection and a desire to be together? Marriage, frankly, it's a financial transaction. It's a contractual obligation, and therefore, you know, you have to look at it to some extent as a business proposal, and this applies to couples who are not LGBT and couples who are LGBT. So I think the analysis has to be a little bit more frank today than it was, where people just assumed marriage was the right thing to do. Relationships are different today. Finances are different today. Risks are different today. So when people are unmarried or LGBT and they want to consider all their options, sometimes it's not a bad idea to talk about that prior to creating this contract.
Well, that's amazing. You've just given us so many things to think about, and I can really see when you start talking about how complicated these relationships get, how making these plans now when you're able to can really preserve not just your relationship with your family, but your family's relationship with each other when you're gone, because you've already set it all out and there's nothing left to disagree about, because it's all written down and all set and ready to go. So that, Rob, I just want to thank you. That was just an amazing overview. And as Rob had mentioned, this is part one of a multi-part series. Rob helps families with many, many different issues. And you know, this is talking a little bit about your general estate planning and some of your long-term care and medical planning. He helps with that. What to do in a crisis situation. So maybe you find yourself all of a sudden thrust into a situation that you haven't really planned for, and now you're dealing with it. Of course, other tools like wills and powers of attorneys and trusts, protecting your assets and planning for your when you need Medicaid, guardianships, helping people with special needs with their planning and trusts, and of course administering that estate and handling real estate transactions perhaps after. So these are just some of the many topics that you will find that we'll be talking about, that Rob helps people with, and we'll be talking about in this series of webinars. But Rob, sometimes people have an issue, they want to talk to you just right now, and they don't want to wait until we get to the next webinar. So what should people do right now to learn more?
Well, I mean, first and foremost, please give me a call if you have any questions. You know, we can get together in the office, something like that if you're local. Certainly go to our website, slutskylderlaw.com. That has a bunch of information. It has a bunch of different resources. It can get you started in your thinking process. Ultimately, you know, for most people, they will need to contact an estate planning or elder law attorney unless they are themselves estate planning or elder law attorneys. And so going to the website will give you some guidance, but ultimately, if you want to talk, the best thing is to just call the office and we can schedule an appointment that suits you.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Rob, and we will hopefully see everybody again in our next webinar.